On October 12, 2022, in the city of Austin, Texas, a shocking crime shook the community. A 32-year-old man was arrested for the murder of his partner after an argument that escalated into violence. However, behind this act of violence was a much more complex story, where the dynamics of abuse, psychological manipulation, and ethically questionable decisions of a mental health professional played a crucial role. This documentary explores how a toxic relationship and an unconventional professional intervention led to a fatal outcome. Thomas Reed, 32, and Emily Carter, 28, were a couple who, from the outside, seemed to have it all. They lived together in a modern apartment in downtown Austin, worked in their respective careers. Thomas was a software engineer, Emily a graphic designer, and, in the eyes of those around them, they were the epitome of a successful young couple. But behind that facade, Thomas and Emily's relationship was anything but ideal. From the beginning, Emily had displayed controlling and manipulative behaviors that slowly chipped away at Thomas's self-esteem. Emily was known for her strong character, her ability to assert herself in any situation, and her tendency to be a perfectionist. However, in her relationship with Thomas, these qualities morphed into a pattern of emotional abuse that kept him trapped in a cycle he didn't know how to escape. Thomas had met Emily in 2017, during a gathering of mutual friends. From the first moment, he was drawn to her energy and confidence. Emily, with her charisma and charm, quickly captivated him. The relationship progressed at a rapid pace, and in less than a year they were already living together. For Thomas, Emily was his everything. However, that adoration soon turned into a vulnerability that Emily did not hesitate to take advantage of. Emily had absolute control over every aspect of Thomas's life. From what clothes he should wear to how he spent his money, every decision had to be approved by Emily. She was quick to criticize him, often in hurtful ways, and to make comments that undermined his self-esteem. "You're useless without me," she would often tell him in the midst of arguments. Although Thomas recognized the harm these words caused, his love for Emily kept him tied to the relationship. By the summer of 2022, the pressure began to take its toll. Thomas had been enduring Emily's emotional and, at times, physical abuse for years, but his mental health eventually began to deteriorate. Close friends noticed that he had lost weight, looked constantly tired, and avoided participating in social activities. "He looked like a defeated man," said one of his closest friends, who preferred to remain anonymous. In August 2022, after a particularly violent fight in which Emily hit him in the face with a pillow filled with heavy objects, Thomas made the decision to seek professional help. Although he didn't want to end the relationship, he felt he needed tools to manage his increasing anxiety and depression. That's when she met Dr. Rachel Miller. Dr. Rachel Miller was a psychologist with more than 20 years of experience. At 45, she was known for her empathetic and direct approach to helping her patients deal with their emotional problems. Rachel had built a reputation as a reliable and effective professional, and Thomas came to her office hoping to find relief. From their first session in September 2022, Rachel was struck by Thomas's story. She listened intently as he described how Emily belittled him, controlled him, and made him feel inadequate. "I don't understand how anyone can be so cruel to a person they claim to love," Thomas said during their first session. Rachel, no stranger to dealing with emotional abuse, felt a mix of grief and anger as she heard the details of Thomas's relationship. For the first month of sessions, Rachel tried to guide Thomas through traditional methods. She gave him advice on setting boundaries, working on his self-esteem, and finding ways to communicate his needs to Emily. However, the more she heard about the relationship, the harder it was for her to maintain a professional perspective. Rachel was going through a difficult time in her own personal life. Divorced for 5 years and with few meaningful relationships since then, she had developed a pessimistic view of love. The story of Thomas, a kind and sensitive man trapped in an abusive relationship, struck a deep chord with her. Gradually, she began to become emotionally involved in a way that exceeded the boundaries of her professional role. As the sessions progressed, Rachel began to introduce less conventional advice into her therapy. "Thomas, you need to think about yourself. What is this relationship getting you? Is it really worth all the pain you're going through?" she told him during one of their sessions in October. While her words could be interpreted as part of a therapeutic approach, Rachel knew she was crossing a line. In one particularly emotional session, Rachel confessed to Thomas, "I don't understand how anyone could be so blind to how wonderful you are. Emily doesn't deserve you." These words, though seemingly well-intentioned, marked the beginning of a more personal relationship between them. As the weeks turned into months, The relationship between Thomas and Dr. Rachel Miller began to morph into something more than just a professional interaction. Rachel couldn't help but feel a special connection to him. His history of abuse, his gentle personality, and his vulnerability sparked in her a mix of compassion and admiration that soon began to cloud her judgment as a professional. In their sessions, Rachel stopped offering traditional advice and began introducing ideas that pushed the ethical boundaries of psychology. "Thomas, you need to stop thinking about what she wants. When was the last time you put yourself first? You deserve better," she would often tell him. While these words might sound empowering, they hid an undercurrent of self-interest. Rachel felt that someone like Thomas deserved to be with someone like her, someone who could value and care for him. Thomas, for his part, began to depend emotionally on Rachel. For the first time in years, he felt like someone was listening to him and appreciating him. Their weekly sessions became his only refuge, the only place he could talk without fear of being judged or ridiculed. Rachel reinforced this dependency with constant praise and validation. "You're an amazing man, Thomas. I can't believe how you've endured so much pain. You're stronger than you think." In late October 2022, Rachel began suggesting that Thomas end his relationship with Emily. "You can't go on like this, Thomas. Every day you spend with her is a day you lose your dignity and your happiness," she told him in a session. Although Thomas understood that his relationship with Emily was toxic, the love he felt for her and his fear of being alone paralyzed him. "It's not that easy, Rachel. She is everything to me, even if she treats me badly. I don't know what my life would be like without her," he replied. Thomas's reluctance to leave Emily began to frustrate Rachel. She felt like he was trapped in a dead-end relationship and that her efforts to help him were in vain. But deep down, there was something else going on, too. Rachel was beginning to develop deeper feelings for Thomas. In her mind, she believed that she could be the person to save him, someone who would value him in a way Emily never had. Rachel began using her position as a psychologist to manipulate Thomas. She introduced the idea that his life would only improve if he made drastic decisions. "Thomas, sometimes we need to cut off what hurts us for good. There is no other way forward," she told him in a November session. These words, however ambiguous, began to plant seeds of doubt and despair in Thomas's mind. Thomas was at an emotional crossroads. On one hand, he felt like his relationship with Emily was destroying him, but on the other, he couldn't imagine his life without her. Rachel's words haunted him constantly. He felt torn between the love he still felt for Emily and the growing admiration he was developing for Rachel. Were his feelings for the psychologist influenced by her vulnerability, or were they the result of Rachel's manipulation? Meanwhile, the situation with Emily wasn't improving. As Thomas tried to set boundaries, Emily became even more aggressive. "What's wrong with you lately? Where do you get these ridiculous ideas?" she yelled at him during an argument in their apartment. Thomas tried to implement Rachel's advice, but each attempt ended in an even more intense fight. On November 15, 2022, Thomas had a particularly violent argument with Emily, in which she broke one of his cell phones by throwing it at him in a fit of rage. That evening, Thomas texted Rachel outside of regular session hours. "I don't know how much more I can take. I feel like I'm on the verge of a breakdown," the message read. Rachel immediately responded, "We need to talk. I'm here to help you through this." In a later session, Rachel became more direct with her advice. "Thomas, you can't let her control your life anymore. If you don't do something soon, you're going to lose yourself. Is that what you want?" These words resonated deeply with Thomas, who began to seriously consider ending their relationship. However, every time he tried to confront Emily, his fear and emotional dependency paralyzed him. Rachel, seeing that her efforts weren't yielding results, began to take a more aggressive stance. In a session in late November, she told him, "Thomas, people like Emily never change. If you don't take drastic measures, you'll never be happy." Although these words seemed motivating, they were loaded with a manipulative subtext that sought to push Thomas down a dangerous path. Meanwhile, Rachel struggled with her own feelings. Every time she saw Thomas, she felt a stronger connection to him. She believed she was destined to be with someone like him, someone who could understand and value her. However, she knew that her position as a psychologist made this idea inappropriate. But her emotions blinded her, leading her to cross ethical and professional boundaries. On December 1, 2022, Rachel made a critical mistake. At the end of a particularly emotional session, she put her hand on Thomas's and said, "You are not alone. I will always be here for you. This gesture, while seemingly innocent, marked a shift in their dynamic. Thomas began to see Rachel not just as a psychologist, but as someone who truly cared about him. While Thomas and Rachel's connection grew stronger, his relationship with Emily continued to deteriorate. Their arguments became more frequent, and Thomas felt like he was reaching his limit. On December 10th, after a fight in which Emily accused him of being weak and a failure, Thomas left the house and drove aimlessly for hours. He ended up parked in front of Rachel's office, wishing he could go in and talk to her. At their next session, Thomas told Rachel what had happened. I don't know how much longer I can take this. I feel like I'm stuck in an endless cycle, he told her. Rachel, seeing him so vulnerable, decided to be more direct than ever. Thomas, you need to get out of her. It doesn't matter how, but you need to get out of this relationship before it's too late. In the weeks that followed, the connection between Thomas and Rachel continued to deepen. For Thomas, Rachel was not just a psychologist. She was his confidant, his refuge, and the only person who seemed to understand the emotional chaos he was experiencing. For Rachel, each session reinforced the idea that Thomas was an exceptional man, trapped in an abusive situation that she must fix at any cost. Rachel's obsession with Thomas grew in secret. At night, she would mentally replay the sessions, remembering every word and gesture. She felt that her mission was not only to help him, but to save him, even if it meant breaking all the ethical rules of her profession. The line between the professional and the personal had become completely blurred. On December 20th, 2022, Rachel made a decision that would mark a turning point in her relationship with Thomas. During a session, she told him, Thomas, you can't go on like this. You have to think about what you really need to be happy. Emily is an obstacle in your life, and until you get her out of your way, you will never be able to find peace. These words, while seemingly motivational, were loaded with a dangerous subtext. Rachel wasn't just encouraging Thomas to end their relationship. She was planting the idea that Emily was the problem that needed to be eliminated so he could be happy. Thomas, for his part, was more confused than ever. Rachel's words tormented him constantly. Was Emily really the problem? Or was he the one who couldn't find the strength to take charge of his life? His growing admiration for Rachel complicated matters even further. At times, he wondered if his feelings for her were genuine or the result of the manipulation he had been subjected to. Meanwhile, his relationship with Emily continued to deteriorate. The arguments were constant, and Thomas felt like he was getting closer to an emotional breakdown every day. On December 22nd, after a fight in which Emily hit him in the chest and repeatedly called him names, Thomas left the house and drove straight to Rachel's office. Even though it was late and he didn't have a scheduled session, he needed to see her. Rachel, seeing him arrive, greeted him with a mixture of concern and excitement. I can't take it anymore, Rachel. I feel like I'm on the brink of something terrible, he confessed through tears. Rachel, instead of calming him, took advantage of his vulnerability. Thomas, you have to take control. You can't let Emily continue to destroy you. It's time for you to do whatever it takes to free yourself. On December 24th, 2022, Christmas Eve, the event that would change Thomas's life forever occurred. That night, Thomas and Emily had an argument that quickly escalated into shouting and threats. Emily, visibly upset, yelled at him, "You are useless, Thomas. You will never be anything without me. You should thank me for not leaving you years ago." Thomas, feeling cornered and emotionally drained, remembered Rachel's words, "You have to do whatever it takes to free yourself." In a fit of rage and desperation, he lost control. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen and, on impulse, attacked Emily. He stabbed her repeatedly until she fell to the floor, motionless. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas, covered in blood, stood in the middle of the room, staring at Emily's body. He couldn't believe what he had done. He hadn't planned to kill her. He had simply lost control after years of abuse and emotional manipulation. But now, there was no turning back. In shock, Thomas didn't call the police or ask for help. Instead, he picked up his phone and dialed Rachel's number. When she answered, her voice was calm, but as he listened to Thomas, he realized something terrible had happened. "Rachel, I killed her. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop myself. She was screaming, and I couldn't take it anymore," he told her through sobs. Rachel, though initially shocked, tried to remain calm. She knew that her involvement in the case could be exposed if she didn't handle the situation carefully. "Thomas, listen. You need to clean up the scene and get rid of the gun. Afterwards, I want you to come see me. Don't talk to anyone else, understand?" she said in a firm but reassuring tone. Thomas, following Rachel's instructions, cleaned up the crime scene as best he could and hid the knife in a dumpster far from his home. He then drove to Rachel's office, where she was waiting for him. When he arrived, he was pale and shaking, clearly in shock. Rachel, though horrified by what had happened, tried to comfort him. "Don't worry, Thomas. Everything will be okay. We'll figure this out together," she said as she hugged him. However, in her mind, Rachel knew that her involvement in the case could destroy her career and her life. Despite attempts to cover it up, the crime did not go unnoticed. Neighbors had heard the argument and screaming, and one of them called the police. When officers arrived at the apartment, they found Emily's body and began an immediate investigation. They quickly connected Thomas to the crime, and on December 26th, he was arrested at Rachel's office. During questioning, Thomas confessed to what had happened, but also mentioned Rachel's role in his life. "She told me I had to get rid of Emily. She made me believe this was the only way," he told investigators. These statements led police to investigate Rachel, who denied having any intention of manipulating Thomas. Thomas's trial began in March 2023 and captured national media attention. Prosecutors presented evidence of Rachel's emotional manipulation of Thomas, including messages and recordings of their sessions. Although Rachel denied any intent to influence the crime, the jury found that her actions had significantly contributed to Thomas's mental state. Thomas was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Rachel, meanwhile, lost her license as a psychologist and faced malpractice charges, though she was not criminally convicted. The story of Thomas, Emily, and Rachel left an indelible mark on the Austin community. It was a reminder of how toxic relationships, emotional abuse, and manipulation can lead to devastating consequences. Although Thomas paid the ultimate price, many are wondering if Rachel's actions were what really triggered the tragedy.